With the new year comes a brand new real estate market here for the Chicago metro area. But what will 2024 hold? Will the suburbs continue to be red hot? Will the city struggle? And what's going to happen with mortgage interest rates? You've probably got a lot of questions, so in this video, we're going to go over my predictions for the 2024 Chicago metro housing market. Hi, my name is Peter, and I'm a realtor here in the Chicagoland area. If you're thinking about moving here, want to learn a little bit more about the area, or if you're actually thinking about selling and leaving Chicago, feel free to get in touch. All my contact info is down below, and I'm sure that my team and I can assist you. Okay, so before we dive into the 2024 predictions, let's do a quick recap of what 2023 was like for the Chicago housing market. Overall, the housing market here did appreciate, however, nearly all of that was because of the suburbs, not Chicago itself. Nearly every Chicago suburb saw a lot of home appreciation, and that was driven by a lack of inventory and high buyer demand. Sure, high mortgage interest rates caused a lot of buyers to wait on the sidelines last year. However, it also created a lock-in effect with sellers, where sellers weren't willing to sell their houses that had 2.5% or 3% mortgage interest rates just to buy those at 7% or more. As a result, the demand was much higher than the supply, and in the suburbs, you frequently saw low days on market, multiple offers, and homes selling well above asking price. Now, Chicago proper was a completely different story, and the downtown markets here are the ones that suffered the most. This is mostly because return to office numbers are still only around 55 to 60% of what they were pre-pandemic. And as a result, if you don't have that same demand for the downtown markets, prices are going to stay stagnant or sometimes even decline. Now, in other neighborhoods throughout the city, it was sort of hit or miss. There were still some more competitive low inventory markets that occurred. However, a lot of the markets in Chicago didn't see a lot of price appreciation, and some of them were convincingly buyers markets. In general, Chicago did see an uptick in crime last year and got a lot of bad press because of it. And as a result, there still isn't a high level of confidence in the city, making it a little difficult for sellers. Okay, so now what can we expect this year in 2024? Now let's start with mortgage interest rates because they have a massive influence on how the real estate market performs. And the consensus seems to be that rates are going to cool off this year. The Federal Reserve seems to have gotten a good grasp on inflation, and they'll likely either stop rate hikes or maybe even introduce some cuts throughout the rest of the year. Now, of course, this is going to be a balancing act by the Fed because if they cut rates too quickly, then we're going to return to a high inflation environment, which we're desperately trying to avoid. If there are going to be rate cuts this year, they probably won't be very big and definitely won't be anything near to the levels we experienced in 2020 and 2021. The only thing that would change that is if the US entered a recession and the Fed needed to stimulate the economy again, in which case we'd see more drastic rate cuts. The consensus seems to be by experts that mortgage interest rates will end up somewhere in the high 5s to low 6s, which for comparison, in 2023, they went over 8% at one point in October. So what impact will these lower rates have? Well, they're going to stimulate the housing market a little bit more, but it won't be a major difference. Sure, some buyers may come off the sidelines and re-enter the housing market because 6% interest rates are much better than 8%, and there's a lot of pent-up demand from waiting on purchasing a home, but it's still going to be difficult for sellers to let go of their 2.5%, 3% interest rates in exchange for those that are in the high 5s or low 6s. And as a result, I'm still predicting low inventory in 2024. That being said, I think a lot of people are finally used to where interest rates are, and they're accepting the fact that, well, this is where they're going to be, and I'm not going to go ahead and wait around for big rate cuts just to go on with my life, purchase a home, sell, move, etc. So while I'm not expecting a massive amount of transactions or new inventory to hit the market this year, I do think that it's still going to be a lot better than it was in 2023. And how will this impact all of the submarkets in the Chicago metro? Well, I still think that the suburbs are going to be red hot and very competitive for a majority of the year. There's still so much pent-up demand from buyers that couldn't win out in 2022 and 2023 in all these bidding wars, and they're going to be re-entering the market trying again to get their suburban homes, and as a result, the supply and demand will be completely out of whack, heavily favoring the sellers. I personally know several friends who got outbid on homes over the last few years that decided to rent, and they're actively waiting. They're saying, okay, 2024, the rates have come down a little bit. I'm ready to jump into the market again. So if you're a seller, things are probably not going to be a whole lot different than they were the last couple of years. You're going to have all the leverage. You're probably going to get multiple offers and have a low time on market. Now, if you're a buyer, be prepared to act fast and compete on homes that you like. My recommendation would be to save up as much money as possible for larger down payments and earnest money deposits to make your offer stronger. So I don't expect a major change from the Chicago suburbs market market between last year and this year. But what about Chicago? Well, again, I think it's going to be a little bit more neighborhood dependent, which Chicago has always been. My prediction is that the major change is going to be with the downtown markets. And I actually think that you're going to see a lot more activity, a lot more transactions, and a slightly higher price growth, although not a big one, but a slightly higher one than you had in 2023. The reason for this is I believe that a lot more employers will begin calling their workers from home into the office again. And as a result, people are going to want to live much closer to where they work. And since most of these jobs and headquarters are in the downtown markets, that housing market will be a lot more in demand. As for the rest of the neighborhoods, I think the desirable ones will remain competitive, while the less so desirable ones will be a little bit more in favor of the buyer. If Chicago can get the crime a little bit more under control, I think the market will perform a lot better. But if things take a turn for the worse, then I think the overall Chicago market will continue to suffer and only favor the suburbs more. So how will the housing market develop over the course of the year? Well, my prediction is that in Q1 and Q2 of this year, we're going to get a lot of activity. More so than in 2023, and probably something similar to 2022, which, remember, that's when the interest rates didn't quite spike yet and we got a lot of transactions happening. So I do think Q1 and Q2 of this year will be busy. However, I think Q3 and Q4 is when things really begin to slow down, more so than previous years. And the reason being is it is a major election cycle. A lot of buyers and a lot of sellers like to wait for election results to come in before they end up doing any sort of real estate transactions. So towards the end of summer, I have a feeling that there's going to be a major drop off in the transactions that likely won't pick back up until the following spring of 2025. So if you're a buyer and you want to have the most amount of options available to you, you probably want to start looking in Q1 and Q2. And if you're a seller, that's probably the time to sell as well, because it's only been a few weeks into 2024, but I'm already starting to have this come up in conversations with sellers and buyers. So I think it's really going to take a turn in Q3 and Q4 of this year. Okay, so let's quickly summarize everything that we discussed. So in 2024, the Chicago metro housing market will actually be very similar to what it was like in 2023. The most notable differences will be that interest rates will come down slightly, and as a result, we'll see a little bit of an uptick in transaction volume. However, the suburbs will continue to remain hot and the city will slowly continue its recovery. Now, things can obviously take a turn for the worse depending on what happens with crime in Chicago, what interest rates do, what the global economy does, and of course, what ends up happening with these elections. So everything is subject to change. However, I do expect 2024 in general not to be too different from 2023. So there it is. Those are my 2024 Chicago metro housing market predictions. I'm curious about what you think. So if you agree with me, or even better, if you disagree with me, let me know down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you're looking to learn a little bit more about what it's like to live in Chicago, feel free to take a look at any of my other videos where I go a lot more in depth about other topics. Thanks again, and catch you on the next video.